Hey guys, welcome back to Token Tech. Today I wanted to do a little quick video on my thoughts and opinions on the new Ryzen announcement, right? Ryzen 3000 or Zen 2. I'm not going to go through everything, not every little detail, because, well, most of you probably have already seen a lot of videos outlining all the details, maybe even watched the keynote. So we're just going to do broad strokes here and kind of look at it from, a bird's eye perspective. So the only new segment was Ryzen 9 with a 12-core, 24-thread CPU. Everything else has somewhat close to an equivalent from the previous generation, so it makes it very easy to just look at them directly compared to the previous gen. So on the left-hand side, we have the 2000 series, and on the right-hand side, we have the upcoming 3000 series. Now again, like I said, the 12-core, 24-thread, that's its own new category, and that's going to be really interesting to see. And I wonder how people are going to do comparisons, if they're going to compare them to Intel, if they're going to compare them to Threadripper, probably both, to be honest, and I wonder how that's going to change and affect things. Now, people might be thinking that you don't need high-end desktops anymore, because on the mainstream you can get 12 cores, and we know the 16 core is coming. But the big difference is going to be PCIe lanes. So for a gamer, 16 plus 4 plus 4 is totally fine. That's 16 for your graphics card, 4 for like 4 more for an NVMe SSD, and 4 more through the chipset. For someone who's doing like real work on their computer, they're probably going to need more than just 16 4 4. That's why Threadripper was so popular, having 64 PCIe lanes, I believe. If not more. So that's going to keep a lot of the really high-end desktop users away from this, which is why I'm glad that AMD has confirmed Threadripper is still coming, just later than expected. But this is cool for people who are in that in-between area. People who do some production stuff, but also do a lot of consumer-grade stuff. Really great crossover and a really great price, because alternatively you had to spend a lot more money to get this kind of performance. Now, when we go down the product stack, we have a 3800X, 3700X, 3600X, and 3600. So you can basically see, just by looking at the numbers, what they're supposed to replace. So again, the 3800X, now this is an 8-core 16-thread CPU, so you would think maybe this replaces the 2700X, but in actuality, it's almost also in its own category. So some of you may or may not remember that in first generation Ryzen, we also had an 1800X, so an 8-core CPU that was kind of the highest binned 8-core CPU, right? It's the CPU that I run in my system currently. With second gen Ryzen, we never got a 2800X. We only had the 2700X. So this is kind of replacing the 2700X, but also is like a half step above it in terms of replacing what came beforehand. Now again, we're getting 8 cores and 16 threads, but we are getting much higher clock speeds. We're getting more L3 cache and the same TDP. That's really what is pretty amazing here, is that we're getting higher clock speeds, more cache, higher IPC for the same thermal envelope, right? That 105 watts. The only downside is the price. But like I said, this doesn't really replace the 2700X. It would have replaced the 2800X, but we never got that. So in that sense, it is still a good value, but I don't think it's what a lot of people were looking for. But again, I don't think it's really a downside. I know we're going to have to wait and see for the benchmarks, but with that IPC improvement of 15% and the clock speed improvement, that's going to equal a pretty big performance increase. Go down to the next one, that's the 3700X. This one really replaces the 2700X, but also in a way replaces the 2700 for a couple key reasons. The big one is the 65 watt TDP. So this is the same TDP as the 2700, as you can see on the left hand side. What that means is that in terms of thermal demands and power demands, it replaces the 2700. And if we look at it from that perspective, it's a big step ahead from the 2700. But it has the same price tag as the 2700X did at the when the 2700 launched. So from a price point, it's replacing the 2700X. And if we look at it from that standpoint, it still is a pretty big improvement, because we're getting a lower TDP, meaning less heat, meaning less power draw, but with still a higher clock speeds. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice it's a little bit of both and. The base clock is lower than the 2700X, but the boost clock is higher. So it's going to be kind of similar in performance, except for that 15% IPC increase. Because of those gains, it will still be faster. I just don't think it's going to be crazy fast. I don't think you're going to see that. I think that's more of the 3800X. Now, again, we don't know about overclocking, so we can only go by this. I don't know if they're going to all overclock to 4.5, or if they can all overclock to 4.6, or if it's only going to hit 4.1. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that just based on stock performance, the 3700X will outperform the 2700X, but not by a crazy amount. For that, you'd probably want to step up to 3800X. But again, this isn't news. We all know this already. Then you have the 3600X, which obviously replaces the 2600X. It's a little bit more expensive. Same TDP. But again, higher IPC, higher clock speeds. It's going to outperform it quite handily. And the last one is the 3600X. Same TDP, same price, much higher clocks, higher IPC. Going to outperform it, again, quite handily. Now, taking a step back and just looking at all of this, what does this mean? Well, when we looked at first generation to second generation, there wasn't really that big of a need to upgrade. It was definitely better, and so if you're building from scratch, you should start with the second generation. But if you had the first generation like I did, there really wasn't a need, or it wasn't that compelling to upgrade to second generation. Why? The clock speeds increased. Why wasn't it as compelling as right now? The difference is latency, memory compatibility, and really the big one is the 15% IPC increase. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there was a small, very, very small IPC increase from first gen to second gen. But going from second gen to third gen, or Ryzen 3000, that's 15%. That's a huge, huge increase in terms of IPC gains, which means that even though we're getting very similar clock speed advantage from 2000 to 3000, very close to what we saw from 1000 to 2000, even though they're very close to the same increases in clock speed, those clocks matter more because it's not just an increase in clock, but it's also an increase in instructions per clock. Those two things combined make this a very substantial upgrade. So even without seeing benchmarks, without seeing independent reviews, we can all, gather that this is going to be a very successful launch. They're going to perform very well. And I think their gaming performance, which is the only place that they aren't as good as Intel. They're not bad by any means. They're very good at gaming, but they're not as good as Intel in gaming. I'm pretty sure with this launch, they're going to catch right up, if not be a little bit better. And in terms of power draw, they're definitely better, which is kind of insane to think about if you just look at the older stuff AMD used to make. I'm really excited about the thermal package. That means that because they kept the same TDP, all of our Ryzen motherboards from the 300 and the 400 series should totally work with these CPUs. Really isn't going to be anything different. Maybe you'll see differences when it comes to overclocking, but if you have a good like X370 or X470 motherboard, you should be totally fine with putting in one of these CPUs. And I'm actually looking forward to it. I don't know if I'm going to upgrade yet, because I'm still very happy with the performance I'm getting, but it would be really cool to do so. Now, out of all of these processors that we know of so far, I think that the 3600 is the most compelling, the most interesting. Basically because of price. Being $200 is within a lot of people's budgets, right? When you're building a computer, $200 for a CPU is, that's pretty good, especially because it comes with its own cooler that is fairly adequate. And 65 watts really isn't that hot to begin with. So, and 6 cores, 12 threads is plenty for gaming and plenty for, if you're just a hobbyist YouTuber like I am. Along with the IPC gains, the clock speed gains, probably some sort of, I'm kind of speculating here, but probably some sort of advancements in how it boosts those cores too, so it can do a better job of it. And the gaming increases and all that stuff. I really do think that the 3600 is going to be where it's at, especially because if we look to prior generations of Ryzen, the lower spec CPUs typically can overclock to the same or very close to the same as the more expensive chips, right? So for instance, I used to have a 1700 that could overclock to 3.9 gigahertz. My 1800X can overclock to 4.1 gigahertz. That's not really that big of a difference. And it would take so much power to hit 4.1 that I just run it at 4.0 because it uses drastically less power. So that being said, if you can overclock your 3600 to hit within 100 to 200 megahertz of the 3600X, why not? And save the $50. Or maybe use the $50 to get a better cooler, or put the $50 towards a better graphics card, which is going to more drastically impact your gaming experience. So, all these things come into play, but for me, I think that's definitely the most interesting one. That's the one that they cannot afford to get wrong. The 12-core one is so cool and interesting. We all are waiting for the 16-core one, but they're so expensive, very few people are going to buy them. Most people are going to go for the Ryzen 5 3600 and get a crazy good deal and experience from them and have good gaming and good everything else from them. That's what I'm looking forward to. And if the IPC gains are that much and the clock speeds do go up that high and you can overclock, if those can overclock pretty well, and let's say you can get an all-core boost of 4.2 or 4.3 or 4.4 by overclocking, you might see the 3600X outperforming the previous generation 8-core CPUs just because of the IPC increase. So that one, I really am excited to see how that performs because it's the lower price, all those things I already mentioned. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for me for this video. Again, it's just more of a talking video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Which of the Ryzen CPUs are you looking forward to the most? Are you going to pick any of these up? If you are, which one are you going to pick up? And what motherboard are you thinking of getting if you don't have one already? Anyways, that's going to be it for me. I'll catch you guys in the next one.